Ask any runner, and we will confirm that running becomes an obsession. It's a total mind and body takeover, and no matter what other exercise we find ourselves partaking in, nothing compares. We often don't remember the hard parts. We remember the happy, the sometimes scary, the complete peace that comes with long distance running. We glance over the hard days of training and racing and romanticize the experience. Covering kilometers that often leave people gaping, we will confirm that the runner's high is exactly as incredible of a feeling as described. We all have those moments. We've all hit the wall, and we have all experienced the muscle and joint pain that come when a race was harder than we expected. We've all shown up underfed, overspent, and undertrained. We've all contemplated dropping out when a friendly face shouts, "You've only got a few more miles," and your vigor is restored. Some of us do it because we love running. Some of us are looking for anything that will keep us outdoors. Some of us do it for the t-shirt or to be able to post the Medal Monday picture on social media. Some of us walk away with ginormous smiles, and some of us hobble away injured. Some of us have found that this is a place that we can excel, and money earned seems like a bonus. The reasons for running miles beyond what others would are as plentiful as the personalities of those running. And still, on a spring day in China, this blissful feeling was not experienced. All 172 participants experienced fear, cold, and dread as a storm rolled in. 8 of these runners barely made it out, and another 21 dropped dead. Welcome to Tragedy with a View.
So we got dead people this time.
We've got dead people this time.
A lot of dead people.
So this whole time that I was like prepping the intro, all I could think of was that part in Grease where Danny is like trying to be a hotshot athletic guy because Sandy's into the football star or whatever.
I don't see a connection yet. Keep going.
Now, there's a lot of other sports that don't have any contact at all.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Like track.
What do you mean, running?
What, you just like running? I mean, something that needs endurance. Something needs stamina. Like long distance running. Cross-country running.
Yeah, so that's basically what I thought about the entire time. I was just like, I literally like that part where it was just like,
long distance running.
That comes with long distance running. I tried very hard to not be like, long distance running.
No, put it in there. Use your personality.
We'll keep that clip in. All right, so the Yellow River Stone Forest Trail races took place on May 22nd, 2021. This event was only 4 years old, having started in 2018, and in 2021, they had 3 races planned, which is super normal. It included a 5K or 3.1 miles, a half marathon, which is 13.1 miles or just over 21 kilometers, and then the main event was the 100 kilometer or 62 mile race. Now, this 100K race, due to the terrain runners would have to cross, was popular for those who were into extreme sports that ultras are often forgotten are included in. Many of the runners who were in the lead pack would run ultra races each month. With the total elevation gain of 10,000 feet, this was actually one of the easier courses in China, which probably aided in its popularity.
Easier? Okay.
Yeah. I did not look into any of the other races about like what their things were, but we're going to get into like why ultras became so aggressive. We'll cover a little bit about that. But there has been a huge increase in the aggressiveness of a race that you have to complete, and it's kind of gotten ridiculous. In order to run the 100K, you had to meet certain requirements, which included showing proof of completing a similar race in terms of terrain and elevation of over 50 kilometers or 31 miles within the last year. And this is really standard practice for some of the more difficult or tactical races.
Which is good. Like, you don't want everybody dying.
Right.
Which is what would happen.
Yeah.
She's usually good at pinpoint.
I want to run long distances too.
Long distance running.
Cross country running.
Okay.
Ultra running has become more and more popular over the last 20 years, and because of this, race directors are constantly looking for the next big thing to draw and challenge runners. Some of these challenges can include not only difficult terrain, but longer distances, multi-day events, more elevation gain and drop, as well as peaking into high altitude elevation. In 2018, over 600,000 people ran in some ultra distance race, which is a 1,700% increase from the 1990s.
I was going to say, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Like, I'm impressed that many people qualified, honestly. Like,
well, so a lot of people don't run to race. They do it because they're
not trying to be the fastest.
Right. They're
doing
just
it
trying to complete it.
Say that they did it.
Kind of like last year I did a 15-mile race
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't realize it when I signed up for it, but it had a 4-hour cutoff window, which should have been easily manageable here in Ohio, where we don't have a whole lot of elevation. And because I signed up for it and started training 3 weeks prior, I barely made the cutoff.
Ooh.
So and I was just happy to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of people's mentality, is they just want to be out there and they just want to do it and they want to have fun and meet new people and have friends. And there's this crazy group of people that like to run long distances, and that's where your people is in these races. The trend has resulted in endurance races being less about the distance and more about surviving the elements. Many races do not offer food or fuel at aid stations, requiring runners to either have crew running with them or be completely self-supported through the entirety of the race.
What are they going to hunt while they're racing?
Backpacks.
Okay.
I will also insert here that this is more specific to China, not necessarily Europe and the United States or North America.
I was going to think we should have laws to provide more aid stations.
Yeah.
Right?
From my experience, there's been a lot of aid stations have somebody there and they have food and drinks and those things, but some of the longer distance races, it's just not possible to get that many volunteers to sit around for
at different places
12 to 24 hours.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising to me to have someone not at an aid station, but to have stuff there.
There's just water sitting there or something.
Right. When it comes to ultramarathons, the distance needs to be over 42 kilometers or 26.2 miles, so farther than a marathon. And this includes road running, but if there are any new runners here listening, it's not the length of the race that was the problem in this event, but rather the location and the terrain and a good lack in communication from the race organizers.
Oh.
The event coordinators and operators of the race included Yellow River Stone Forest Administration and the Beijing Sports Culture Development Ltd., which was pretty much just a front for the Jiangtai County Communist Party. And the award for winning the race was a combined $2,300, and there was an additional $250 bonus to anyone who finished within a certain amount of time. It was this race that would bring new growth into the area and help bring the entire country out of poverty, which, by the way, the poverty level in China is defined as making $1.70 or less per day.
What?
Yep. China.
Yeah.
Counties all over in China were using ultras as a draw to bring in tourists and money. In China alone, the number of races held increased from 51 in 2014 to over 1,800 in 2019. So this was a tool that many governments were using to help pull their economies out of poverty. The location was in the Yellow River Stone Forest in Jiangtai County, China, and more specifically, the really tragic events that took place occurred between the second and third checkpoints, which included a section called Magician Hill. Now, this location was a treeless ridge of sandstone that had the Los Plateau to the south and the Tenger Desert to the north, which had been known to cause some sporadic and rough storms. And according to the locals, it is not uncommon for weather to take wild and drastic turns due to the terrain. This is also because of the mountains to the west holding storms and weather patterns in place, and from the north, Siberian winds force their way in and refuse to relent until they have blown themselves out.
So, like, I'm seeing this, they should have, well, I don't want to say they should have, but, like, this could be something that people would really actually want to have. Like, oh, we did this really treacherous storm area, but make sure it is well advertised as such, not a surprise, right?
We're gonna get into the whole gist of it. The race began at the main entrance of the scenic area and had an elevation of 1,595 meters or 5,233 feet. For reference, the average elevation here in Ohio is 614 feet or 187 meters. The summit of this race was located at the third checkpoint, which was at an elevation of 2,230 meters or 7,320 feet. It was between the second and the third checkpoints that was the most difficult part of the race. It was rugged and narrow and really inaccessible. From the nearest road, it took a 1 to 2 hour hike to get into the area. Because the prior year's races were good weather and hot, the race organizers decided not to enforce the rule requirement of runners needing to have rain jackets and at least a middle layer with them. The night before the race, organizers asked for runners to bring their drop bags for the sixth checkpoint located at the 62-kilometer or 39-mile mark, where runners would be able to access those bags as they worked their way through that sixth checkpoint. The weather was calm and not a single person was alerted to the potential weather rolling into the area. No one, that is, except for the weather forecasters. The night before, prior to 10 p.m., not one but two meteorologists warned Jiangtai County about the wind and storms that were predicted for the following day. One stated that the average wind speed will reach levels 5 to 6, with gusts being 7 or above, accompanied by yellowstone and sand, and the other stating massive yellow dust and sand carried by winds, a drop of temperature, and some precipitation. Beware of sudden heavy showers, hail, lightning, and gusts. The wind levels that were referenced, they use the Beaufort wind scale. It begins at 0 and ends at 12, with 0 being no wind and 12 being hurricane force. Levels 6 to 7 range from 39 to 61 kilometers per hour or 25 to 38 miles per hour, meaning that on the low end, large tree branches begin to move and the ending range has the entire tree swaying. Levels 8 to 9 are considered gale force winds with speeds ranging from 62 to 88 kilometers per hour or 39 to 54 miles per hour, which results in trees and structural damage. Higher than this, and trees begin to be blown over, and it is, quote, seldom experienced inland.
So that's a lot of storm for them to be just like, let's just not tell anybody.
Yes.
That's
well,
very severe.
It's not only the race organizers, but as a participant myself, I'm often looking at the weather too before
Absolutely.
I go. And we're gonna get into this in just a second here, but they didn't have a crazy early start. Like, they started at 9 a.m., 10 a.m., somewhere in that time frame, and
that's plenty of time to check the weather.
that's
right?
plenty of time. Like, I'm not going to bed. I often don't go to bed when there's a 7 a.m. start until like 10, 11 o'clock because my nerves just don't let myself lay down before then. So it's that knowledge. I just want to put it out there. That knowledge is not solely on the race organizers and directors and the people who were working the race. It is also on the participants. The rest of it, no. The organizers and directors and the companies involved with it had in my opinion, they had a obligation to make sure that the participants were well equipped, and they failed. We'll get into that though. The following morning, Saturday, May 22nd, 2021, at around 8 a.m., the temperatures held steady in the 5 to 7 degrees Celsius range, or 41 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Just before 9 a.m., runners were congregating near the start of the race. Some chatted with each other, some were laughing and smiling and eager to start the race. Some were hyper-focused and serious, some jumped up and down to keep their leg muscles warm in the cold morning air. Runners were provided with GPS trackers, which were able to send SOS alerts, and many wore GPS tracking watches to keep an eye on their pace and heart rates. Zhang Xiaotao felt the wind kick up, and his gaze was pulled in the direction of his competitors' hats being blown from their heads. Lining up at the starting line, most were only wearing shorts and t-shirts. Now,
it was like 40 degrees.
If you hear this and you think to yourself, but it's cold and they're wearing that, you are not alone. But what I will tell you is that this is not uncommon for racers, especially when you're expecting the weather to warm up on top of moving your body. Generally speaking, your body warms up to a real field temperature of 20 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than the air temperature. And I'm not sure what that equals to in Celsius. So again, generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is to dress for weather 20 degrees warmer than what it actually is. So if it's sitting in the 40 degrees, you want to be comfortable at the 60 degree mark. So t-shirts and shorts on top of running is not, it's not shocking to me, but clearly to people who don't do it, like, it doesn't make sense. I'm just thinking,
like, it's 9 a.m., it's not going to get much warmer. Like, you know, it's already windy. I would put more layers on. Like, I can take them off later if I'm going to sweat, you know? But that's just me.
But,
I'm not a runner.
Yeah. And since the race was beginning mid-morning time frame, they thought that they could afford to lose those early morning layers and prepare for the day to warm up still. Then Zhang Zuchin, mayor of Beiyin, raised his arm in the air, pointing a pistol towards the sky, and then the gun went off, signaling the start of the 100-kilometer race. Runners pressed the start button on their watches, and organizers looked at the computer screens, watching the GPS trackers make their way down the course. Moving quickly, it only took about an hour for the front runners to make it through the first checkpoint, and some even made it through the second. The second checkpoint only had 2 staff members to log runners' times, and the third checkpoint did not have any staff assigned. Which, again, from my experience, that is unusual, but I've not done long or large races. So the fact that a person was not at that checkpoint isn't alarming to me, but still it seems off.
Especially with the weather, I'm just thinking like...
Well, not only the weather, but that terrain, like that, knowing that that's the most difficult part, I would want someone at the bottom as well as someone at the top, because if somebody starts from the bottom and then you don't have confirmation that they made it through that most difficult section, you would want to have somebody there to help out as quickly as possible. And not having anyone there doesn't allow for that.
Because there's going to be a huge delay, like if there's an issue. It's
yeah,
gonna be...
especially with the 1 to 2 hour hike.
Yeah.
As well, the second and third checkpoints were in a cell phone reception dead zone.
Oh, great.
So it was really difficult for participants to communicate with race organizers in this area.
But they were all on GPS. So
They were
did
all
at
on
least know where they
GPS.
were.
That had the ability to send SOS messages.
Okay.
It was when the front runners were between these two checkpoints, the second and the third, that the storm blew in. The second checkpoint was at the 12-mile mark, or 19.3 kilometers, and the third checkpoint was near 17 miles, or 27.3 kilometers. Rain as cold as ice and hail fell from the sky, and the wind swirled and blew, causing runners to lose track of the course and the surrounding terrain.
I was kind of thinking that already, too. Like, when it gets to be that windy, like...
You can't see.
You can't see. You don't know where you're going.
Right.
And as soon as one person gets off track, and I'm probably already foreshadowing, everybody else is going to follow the person in front of them.
Yeah. The real field temperature dropped from 1 degree Celsius at about 10 a.m. to negative 5 degrees Celsius around 11, and stayed that temperature for almost 3 hours, so until about 2 p.m. In Fahrenheit, that is 34 degrees at 10, and then an hour later dropping to 23 degrees.
Oof.
Wind speeds reached levels 6 to 7, and gusts were reaching levels 8 to 9. At 11:50 a.m., the first distress message was sent by one of the runners, and he or she used their GPS that the organizers of the race provided each of the runners. However, they never received a response. Some runners reached the second checkpoint and decided to turn back and head back down towards the starting line. Some were pressing forward into the dauntless terrain, and others huddled together, trying to keep each other warm.
Oh.
One runner, Dang Xiaochong, overheard the staff members at the second checkpoint shouting into their radio, begging the event to be stopped.
So, like, the people assisting, like, at the aid stations or whatever they were.
Yes.
They were, like, trying to tell the organizers, like, we need to stop this race.
Yes.
Oof. I wonder if he kept running after he heard that. Like, I would, personally, I'd stop. I'd be like,
done.
Yeah.
Those who were huddled together sat shivering in the rain, hail and cold, as the wind tore their foil blankets to shreds.
Oh, gosh.
It gets worse.
Oh.
I will say that. It gets worse. At 12:17 p.m., a WeChat message was sent through the official race message group notifying the organizers, again, that they were in distress, and another was sent at 12:30, and this one contained a photo of 10 runners huddled together trying to stay warm. Runners who felt abandoned on the course began searching for some form of shelter, hiding in small caves or gorges to create a block from the wind and cold. After the message of runners huddled together was received, a private search team, which was located at the starting line called Big Sky Rescue, sent 39 members onto the course to target the area between the second and third checkpoints. One of the members of this rescue group noticed one runner in particular who was struggling, and he gave them his uniform and then pulled out a tarp that he and some of the other runners huddled under for some form of shelter and insulation from the wind and rain. However, around 2 p.m., these 39 rescue members had only found 18 runners and escorted them off of the course and back to their lodge.
And how many were there?
There were 172 runners total.
So they're missing...
Yeah, so many...
Almost all of their runners.
I will say many of their runners turned around as soon as that weather rolled in. And they hadn't, a lot of the runners, like, it was the leading pack that was in the brunt of the storm. So many of those not quite as fast runners were able to get back and take shelter before they reached that area that was really hit hard. So at this time, Zhu Kemming, a local shepherd, was tending his sheep while they insisted on grazing during the storm near Magician Hill. He started to notice runners appearing to be in distress. Seeing some collapse, Zhu started to gather them into his Yodong cave, which is a heated sort of house cave that shepherds use in inclement weather. Some of the runners were clearly suffering from hypothermia. Bringing 6 into the warmth, Zhu Keming returned to look for more runners and found 3 runners who had already died before he himself returned to the cave.
Oh my gosh, like probably of hypothermia, I'm
Yes.
thinking, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yep. Near 1 p.m., 2 runners took shelter in a gorge where they both sent SOS messages through their GPS devices. The way that the GPS system was told to work was that once the message was sent, it would pop up on the computer of the race organizers who were monitoring the race. So, kind of backing up the 11:50 message, and then there was a 12:17 and a 12:30 message. All of those should have popped up on the screen of the organizers' computers.
and I'm guessing they're going to say, we didn't see it, we never got it.
Well, I will say finding anything related to the Chinese media is extremely difficult.
Yeah. It tends to
So,
be hush-hush.
Yes, they get rid of it.
Yeah.
Once they're done, it's gone.
Oh.
Back at the starting line, it was 2:30 p.m. when the Yellowstone Forest Administration called for help, but only gave the vague message that we need you to bring winter supplies to the athletes. Meng Pengson, one of the people who responded, noted that he was repeatedly called to see if he had arrived yet, and he felt like he hadn't been told everything, especially because of how often he was being checked in on, with having only been told that they needed supplies because some runners were cold or hurt. And I want to point out here, the spoiler is that at 2:30 p.m., many of the runners who had died had already collapsed, and if they were not dead yet, they were actively dying. So they waited way too long to do anything. Around 4:42 p.m., Zhu Keming, the shepherd who had already saved 6 runners' lives by bringing them into his cave, was able to gather a little phone reception, and he called into his nearby town of Changsheng Village, which coincidentally was the town that the winter supply demand was passed down to, and it was only then that they realized the urgency of what was happening. At some point, the race director called for a helicopter, but unfortunately it was tied up from all of their pilots being on other missions, so a helicopter search and rescue was not an option. Near 5 p.m., those 2 runners that had taken shelter and sent SOS messages through their race-provided GPSs, so 4 hours after they took shelter, they received no response, and with the calming winds, the 2 runners decided to walk their way back to the start line.
Oh my gosh.
So that's essentially 5 to 6 hours later.
Yeah. And like, as a runner, I probably wouldn't expect it to be immediate help, but like an hour maybe is a reasonable time to expect help.
Some sort of communication.
Yeah.
Some sort of communication. Even if it's just saying, we have received your message. Around 6 p.m., Zhu Wanwen, who was on his motorbike and coming from Changsheng, found a runner who was foaming at the mouth and brought them to shelter. And at about 7 p.m., finally, a rescue group was sent in to look for the 33 missing runners at this point.
I'm also thinking about the staff, too. Like, all the people that they sent in to go look for him, like, I'm worried about them, too.
Yeah.
Because this is not a good place to be out.
Yeah. By 8 p.m., 60 villagers, mostly around the age of 50, had hiked into the Magician Hill area looking for runners and had reached the 3rd checkpoint. It was these villagers who not only helped the runners, but were able to help the firefighters who arrived shortly after. Earlier in the day, one of the race crewmen called the Beiyin Prefecture Emergency Center, who passed the message along to the Jingtai County firefighters that help was needed. The firefighters reached the 4th checkpoint, which was car accessible, and then hiked the course backwards toward the 3rd checkpoint. They arrived at the 3rd checkpoint at about 9 p.m., and it was clear by this point that it was no longer a rescue but a recovery mission.
It's already nighttime.
It is already nighttime. The firefighters appeared to be out of their element, bringing thermal detecting gear, which does not help when you are doing a recovery because dead people don't give off body heat, and they got lost in the process a few times. In another unfortunate lack of foresight, these firefighters were not trained on how to identify hypothermia and how to determine if a person was actually dead or if they were just in that very cold, shock froze state.
Oh.
So many of the runners who appeared dead did not have any CPR performed on them. And I am in no way meaning to fault or blame the firemen here.
Yeah, it's not their fault.
Yeah, they do so much good, and they were clearly out of their element, and the people who should have been called were wilderness search and rescue and wilderness paramedics and wilderness first responders, not firefighters who respond to fires and car accidents.
Yeah.
And that's to say, even, I don't know if those wilderness search and rescue and paramedics and first responders even exist in China.
Yeah, you don't know what they're, like, what they supply, I guess.
I do believe there was some false implications given as to how bad the situation truly was. And to me, it sounds like an entire systematic failure in planning, preparation, communication, and taking action.
They're just completely underprepared.
Completely.
Yeah.
1,200 rescuers between professionals and villagers arrived to assist runners on the course this fateful day, and the rescue efforts lasted 20 hours. The race was never officially suspended or canceled, which would have been a wonderful alert that something was gravely wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the runners actually made it through the 4th checkpoint, which was staffed, before finally one of those staff members ran her down and told her that she had to be removed from the course. So the staff at the checkpoints weren't even clued in on what was happening.
I'd be so, like, mad if I was that girl. Like,
yeah.
I made it all the way over here and you're removing me?
Yeah. It wasn't until after every last runner was removed from the course that videos began to surface. Videos of runners telling their loved ones they were okay and going to continue on. Videos of the rain, hail, and wind. Videos of a runner who had passed out with a cut on their forehead and shoes which had been removed. Videos of runners foaming at the mouth and collapsing on the trail.
Oh my gosh. I don't know what foaming of the mouth, is that a hypothermia?
Yeah.
Thing?
Yep.
Okay.
That's a symptom
I've
of
never
hypothermia.
heard of that for hypothermia. I guess in really extreme conditions, that might be, like, because they're not just cold, they're being pelted with wind and probably debris and...
Right.
Oh, so the foamy mouth might be because of the dry, like, if you imagine hurricane weather, literally drying your body up, doesn't matter how much water you drink.
Yeah. Yeah. Combined with other factors, saliva builds up in the mouth and can aerate. And also, I mean, would hypothermia also have, like, some sort of thing where your body starts to dehydrate?
It could, yeah, because your body's,
like,
already in overdrive.
Yeah, maybe it's trying to pull moisture into its cells and away from your skin surface.
It's weird.
18 hours after the very first SOS message was sent, the final body was found.
I'm proud that they found all the bodies.
And a reminder, they had GPS trackers on these people.
Yeah, they should know exactly where they are.
They should.
But it doesn't sound like their GPS trackers worked, so...
That was probably
maybe
a fault.
Yeah.
In the end, 21 runners, 18 men, and 3 women died, all of which were in the lead pack. 4 of the runners somehow made it through the chaos that occurred between the 2nd and 3rd checkpoints and made it to the 4th checkpoint before they were pulled from the course. The really, really sad part about this is all of these runners were wearing smartwatches, which were all likely set in some sort of run or hike activity mode, which means it was recording their heart rates, which means that family or anyone else who had access to the data could see exactly when their heart stopped beating.
Was that something that was relayed in the GPS to the company that was running? Okay.
No, this was specifically from their own personal watches.
Okay.
So, publicly listed casualties, and this is not a full list, again, because it seems like China just tries to erase things once they're done. And I also, the ones that have when their heart stopped, I put that in there as well. There's Ling Jing, a champion and record holder, ultra runner. His heart stopped at 1:08 p.m.
That was very soon.
Very early. I think he was leading.
So he was like literally in the head of the storm.
Yes. Hong Guanjin, a hearing impaired marathon champion of 2019 China's National Paralympic Games. Huang Yinbin, whose heart stopped at 2:02 p.m. Lang Jing, Cao Pengfei, and Wen Jing, whose heart stopped at 4:20 p.m.
So a lot of those names are like of Asian descent. So
they're all, yeah.
All of the runners were?
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, that just makes me so much more upset. 'Cause, like, I don't want to say, oh, those American tourists, let's just let them run in our country. Who cares? I don't want to say that was their mindset. But you would think if it was your own people from your own country, you would be more, like, involved in preparation and communication and, like... like...
caring for your own people.
Yeah.
They cared enough for their people to run and operate ultra marathons to help pull the counties out of poverty, but it wasn't because they actually cared about the people. It was because if you successfully got your country out of poverty, that looked good for your political campaign.
Oh, so some of the people might not even be racing for the fact of racing, but to
the organizers, yeah. Another factor in this was the fact that if you completed the race under a certain time, you got an extra $250.
Which is probably a lot.
Which is
the poverty rate being $1 a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that caused people to choose not to take shelter and to keep pushing forward even when they were not in a place to be able to do so. After the race, 161 members of the families of those who died were offered $150,000 in compensation, but about half refused to accept it. Some of the families responded that there was no explanation and that human error was too large of a factor for them. Other families accepted because there was no way to bring back their loved ones and they just didn't want to talk about it. Many of the family members reported feeling like they were being watched when retrieving their beloved belongings, and those who declined the compensation were discouraged from talking to others, and their families were kept separated from the others' families.
That seems fishy.
That's fishy. Sus. On June 2nd, 2021, the Sports Administration of China suspended all sporting events that were considered high risk that didn't have the proper, notable, reliable organizers heading the event.
Speaking of storms.
After all was done, officials began their investigation into 32 leaders and organizers. The people in leadership roles tried to blame the unpredicted and surprise storms. However, as we already mentioned earlier, not one but two news stations gave warnings of foul weather.
And they knew this area was already
they knew
crazy sporadic storms.
They knew. Other news stations began to question why the race had not been canceled altogether, and Zhang Zuchen, the man who fired the gun at the starting line, apologized on national television in an expression for his role in the deaths of the 21 runners.
Well, we have one good man from the story then.
Yeah. During the investigation, it was determined that fault was due to inadequate safeguards at the race and poor rescue efforts. This was made abundantly clear when you look at the facts that there were no medical or supply stations set up along the route.
What? Like at all?
At all. Runners would go for miles and miles before seeing a staffed checkpoint. The communications for runners were not clear, nor were the GPS trackers paid attention to. Organizers failed to enforce the rules that runners be prepared for inclement weather, and the rescue attempts were poorly carried out. Another fault that was brought up was due to the absolute boom in ultra running popularity. It caused there to be a higher demand for races than there were properly trained and experienced organizers for the races. And in an attempt to bring in the tourism, the required qualification for organizers was largely dismissed.
So like anybody could hold a race.
Yeah.
Great. That's
Gansu Shinjing Sports Company, who ran the race for the last 4 years, was discovered to have no experience in organizing events. And beyond that, they only had one full-time employee, which was their owner, and the crew was gathered only a week before the event. 27 of the 32 leaders investigated were punished. Most were punished with demerit ratings and disciplinary warnings. 5 were arrested and removed from their leadership roles. Jiangtai County Communist Party Secretary, who fronted as an organizer, Li Zobi, committed suicide on June 9th, 2021, when it appears he leapt from his apartment building.
So he was like one of the higher up people.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, he was basically the person responsible for this event.
Oh.
Yeah. To wrap up, as a runner, this story hits home for me because we put so much trust in the people who are organizing the races, and you never really know what you are going to come across in the wilderness. As the tagline goes, when you're walking in the wild, be sure to watch your step. My condolences go out to all of the family and friends of these runners who lost their lives this day, and I hope the next time you go for a run, you take a moment to feel and appreciate what nature has to offer us. Almost cried there.
Yeah, that I can't imagine